everybody, welcome back to my channel. It's Deborah here again. I hope you guys have all had a good week and it's Friday again, back with some more content. So today's topic is going to be vulnerabilities. Oh, I know it's a heavy word, isn't it? Yeah, vulnerabilities. I just wanted us to have a little conversation about what it means and where does it come from and what's the purpose of vulnerabilities, right? So just exploring it a little bit deeper. I think for the most part, what happens with vulnerabilities is we become confused about why we have them or when we see them in others. It's a negative. There's a negative connotation with vulnerabilities, but today we're going to talk a little bit about where they come from. So first of all, you have to understand that vulnerabilities comes really from a place of protection, okay? Somebody wants to protect themselves, so they don't want to show their fear or what they are afraid of. And so they have protective mechanisms that is usually trying to make sure that they don't get exposed. Because they feel like if their vulnerabilities are exposed, that they are going to not be loved and not accepted. And that's one of the main reasons why people don't like to show their vulnerabilities to others. And sometimes when they do show it, and let's for example say that you're in a relationship with someone and their vulnerabilities come out and they show it to you and you don't like it, and then obviously there's some kind of rejection in the relationship. So for the most part, people don't talk about vulnerabilities and they don't even want to know why they have these vulnerabilities. So let's go back to the basics about where does this really come from. So I think we all know that at birth we are very vulnerable, because if we don't have a parent or a guardian to take care of us, then we're not going to survive. Like literally, we're not going to survive. So that's basically where vulnerabilities start. So we're so vulnerable, you can't even look after yourself to survive. So now in the first 6 years, scientists have discovered that in the first 6 years, most of us learn all the coping mechanisms that we carry with us through our lifetime, because during this first 6 years of our life are the most vulnerable times. Okay, so we cannot take care of ourselves. So now when we discover that, oh, my environment needs me to act in this way or in that way, so I have to create what we call coping mechanisms. Okay, so these coping mechanisms helps us initially to survive, but we want to backtrack a little bit, because when you are very young, your perception of reality is kind of just based in this vulnerable state, because you're so you have no power at that time, and then what happens is, because we create this idea we kind of cling to, we carry on with it for the whole life, and we don't know why we have them or where they come from. So this is where they come from. And what happens is, it's really something to do with our brain. So the brain works in two main parts. It's called the conscious brain and the unconscious brain. So the unconscious brain can basically take, I think it's 40 million bits of information per second, and the conscious mind can only process 40 bits of information per second. So your unconscious brain works 1,000,000 times faster than the conscious brain, okay? So just remember that. So what happens in the unconscious brain is many things are recorded there. For example, if you watch babies, children, when they learn to walk, it's kind of funny to see them starting to walk and wobble. But then they learn that skill and you don't have to teach them ever again. Unless, of course, we see people when they have like strokes or something like that, and there's an interference with that pattern, then they have to relearn how to do that activity. But for the most part, your unconscious brain is taking care of so much for us. Hence, it has this huge capacity for speed, processing speed. So when you're breathing, you're digesting, talking, all these things is happening mostly unconsciously, right? So the same thing happens with these vulnerabilities that we formed in our early childhood. So that's part of the issue is how the brain works, okay? So now, let's say when you get older, now we can access more this conscious brain. And the frontal cortex is really what we use to make these executive decisions. Now, let's say, for example, you have a vulnerability, but you don't want to have it anymore. Except when it gets triggered, you act in a certain way because it's stored in the unconscious brain. And because the unconscious brain can process so fast, Your conscious brain, even if you want to make a decision not to be like that, not to have that vulnerability, it doesn't work because the unconscious brain is just so fast at processing, so immediately that gets triggered. This little video is just it's a very quick summarization of how you can start to understand when you have vulnerabilities and why perhaps you're struggling with them and why perhaps you feel stuck with them. And I'm going to, of course, give you the good news too. There is ways and means that we can shift this. First of all, I believe that it's very important to understand what I've just told you, where it comes from, why you have it. And at some point in your life, it helped you. It helped you to survive in those years that you were very vulnerable, okay? But now, let's, for example, say as an adult, you don't need that kind of protection anymore because you can look after yourself. So those vulnerabilities are really not, so now they're not really helping you as much as they're hindering you. Don't be afraid when you have vulnerabilities. Have compassion for yourself and rather use this information I've just given you and backtrack a little bit and see what happened in your environment and why did you create this coping mechanism that now comes forward as a vulnerability. Okay, so that helps you to first of all become aware of it. There has to be awareness. Without awareness, nothing will shift. Without acceptance, nothing will change. And without taking responsibility. That's the number one biggest thing. When you understand that you created that, but it helped you, then you can be grateful for that and you can say, okay, it helped me before, but now I don't need that anymore. That's one way of doing it. And so there are great techniques based in quantum physics, NLP techniques. I mean, we're living in this world of information and information is so readily available to us. There are great techniques that can help you to bridge the information. For example, the conscious brain and the unconscious brain, for the most part, they don't communicate, so that they don't talk to each other. So from the frontal cortex, the executive brain, you're trying to make better choices and better decisions, but when the trigger comes, your unconscious mind takes over because it can just process the information so much faster, okay? So what you want to do is you want to perhaps do something that's going to help you to get these two to talk to each other through some of these techniques. And also, of course, I always say the breath. I think there's last Friday I created the breath technique, a very simple breath technique. I'll put it up in the link for you guys, and then you can check that out again, because what's going to happen with your breath is your breath is going to allow you to access your conscious brain. When you can access the conscious brain and you can really be in the moment with that breath, then you can watch the trigger and watch the vulnerability as it comes up. And when you have that moment of watching what's coming up, in that moment you can pause and you can make a decision. But if you don't have a technique where you can bring yourself into the present moment, and then the unconscious brain is going to take over all the time. So breathing, meditation. Meditation is another wonderful way to teach you how to come back to the present moment, how to utilize this conscious brain, how to utilize your executive brain and say, okay, that is an old trigger. I don't have to act in that way. I can take a moment, I can pause, I can watch. Same like the breath. So breathing meditation is one powerful way that you can do. It's free daily, you can do it. If you're really serious about changing any of these vulnerabilities or these triggers, then you want to go and find a course that you can do that's going to help you through NLP techniques, or like I said, or quantum physics. I have a course coming up very soon called the SRT Masterclass, where we touch on these things. So you'll get a lot of information, tools and techniques of what you can do to shift these patterns and behaviors. Join me for one of those courses and we can work on that together. So yeah, so basically we've covered what is a vulnerability, where does it come from, and how can I shift it. So what you can do to help you to shift your vulnerability right now in this moment is, first of all, to become aware of it. When you can bring awareness to your vulnerabilities and you can take responsibility for that and to know that you created that, that's going to help you to shift a lot. The reason why people often get stuck and they get stuck in a loop kind of behavior and, you know, perhaps sabotaging relationships and so on, is because they are not able to take responsibility. Because when they're having a reaction towards a vulnerability that they have inside of them, there's a perception that the person, the thing on the outside is to blame for that, but they are not, okay? You created that vulnerability. You created it because you needed a coping mechanism when you were in your very first stages of creating or feeling safety. That's what I would suggest for you, is if you're trying right now to get a different outcome for a vulnerability that has perhaps been a problem for you, take a moment. When that vulnerability is triggered, take a moment and try to trace it back. Where did I first feel this? Where did this first happen for me? And you can, if you really sit with yourself, your system is so intelligent. If you truly ask yourself the question, you're going to get some answer. So once you can trace yourself back as far as possible, where that was first created and why you created it, because there's usually a good reason. Everything here is to support us, okay? Every vulnerability and every trigger, every coping mechanism, for example, is here to help you. But you, now that you are older and you have the full use of your executive brain, you can make better choices, okay? So when you can make better choices, then you can have a better life, healthier life. And I hope this is going to help you on some small level in your life. Thanks for watching, everybody. I will see you next week. If you haven't subscribed yet, click on the link. And yeah, I will see you guys next week.